Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Awaken with Lauren Wilde. I am your host, Lauren Wilde, and today we have our very first guest speaker for this storytelling hour, and I'm super excited. And the reason I'm super excited is because number one, our first speaker is my best friend and the headmistress of Wild Spirit School. But also because this is the very first time we have done any actual guest speaker on this podcast. And it's been a huge goal of mine since the very beginning. So I think that we deserve to be able to celebrate for a moment as Pluto Station's direct. So let me go ahead and introduce her now. This is, like I said, my very best friend, my platonic life partner, the headmistress of the school, a certified Wild Circle leading facilitator. And this is Amanda Bryan, aka Athena Wilde, the Desk Witch. Welcome.
Hello, I'm very excited to be on the podcast.
I know you are because you've watched this whole journey of me trying to get here this whole time, and you've been a cheerleader. So it only felt right that it was you as the first guest. So do us a favor and introduce us a little bit to you for all of our newer listeners and build some storyline since we know you're going to be a reoccurring guest here.
Yeah. Hi. Hello. I'm Amanda in my private life and Athena in my public witchcraft life. I am the brand spanking new headmistress of the Wild Spirit School. So that's very new and very exciting. I have been the desk witch around these parts for some time, though, helping behind the scenes with the administrative stuff, the communications, emails, back end systems that are like very boring to other people, but like really get me out of bed in the morning, you know?
I think they got
I
us for
like
you with
love a
that one.
filing system, you know?
No,
So
I
I
don't. I
have
don't
just,
know.
well, no, I mean, I have a weird and kind of winding background in my bachelor's degrees in philosophy. I always thought that I would be a teacher. I thought that I would teach at the collegiate level. That took a different, I am a teacher, but that took a different
Yeah,
path.
exactly.
And now I teach the esoteric arts to adults. So I was right. I'm a teacher of adults, but
Yes.
it's not in a traditional establishment. Um, I'm not very great at talking about myself.
You're a
I
mom.
have a part, I'm a mom. I have an incredibly supportive partner, two beautiful girls. We also have, a family member and her daughter who live with us. So we are just like a bar. We call it the Barbie dream house over here because it's my husband and all female identified people, including our dogs. Dogs are people too over here. Um, I'm a Midwestern transplant to the South. So
Mhm.
that feels very part of my identity as like I am a Midwesterner and I live in the South. And that is a hard place to be.
Yeah, no, we're gonna talk about that for sure. Yeah, and just to build the background of it, you came out of mainline Christianity, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, I call myself a cradle Christian. I was born into a United Methodist family. So
Okay.
mainline progressive Christianity, baptized as an infant by my grandfather in a
Wow.
little bitty rural Methodist church in Ohio.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's so crazy
Vacation
that
Bible school.
oh, you're drawn back to Ohio too.
I
Did you
know.
say vacation Bible
Yeah.
school? Okay. What was that like?
Vacation Bible school, Sunday school. I was an acolyte. I loved it. I'm going to be really honest. I
Okay.
thrived in the
Yeah.
church. Something about the
Okay.
structure, something about the
Yeah.
uh, as an adult, I can look back and know that it was like the perceived sense of like safety and order that all children
Yes.
need. And I was
Yes.
getting that from the church.
Yes. Oh, that's good stuff right there. Yeah, that makes me want to go down a different pathway, but I'm going to take a little note and we'll come back to that one on our next
Okay.
session. Okay, so you went to college. Did you go to a Christian college?
Mhm. I went to a Lutheran college, which is
Okay.
different from
Yeah.
like So when you say like a Christian college, that makes me think of like an evangelical Christian
Yeah.
college where there's like dress codes and chapel requirements and all that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. And my school was not at all like that. So
Okay.
it was a Christian school. We had chapel every day, and you were not allowed to schedule class or required meetings during chapel time so that everybody had the opportunity to go to chapel, but chapel was never required.
Okay.
There was no dress code. The dorms were co-ed by floor,
Okay.
so there were girls' floors and boys' floors, but there
Okay.
were boys and girls in the same building, which was a big
Wow.
scandal from the yeah, I know. I graduated from a conservative um Baptist high school, and they wouldn't, this is definitely just a rabbit trail, but they wouldn't say what school I was going to
Oh,
in
wow.
the
Okay.
and they wouldn't say, because I was on a scholarship for I was on a pre-seminary scholarship to
Okay.
college. They wouldn't publish that information in the like graduation pamphlet because girls were not, like, women were not allowed to be pastors. So
Oh
the
my
idea that I
gosh.
would go to seminary was so offensive that they would only, like, I got two scholarships. I got the pre-seminary scholarship and I got an academic scholarship, and they would only list the academic scholarship. So it
Okay.
was a big like scandal at my from my high school to go to a school where like there were boys on the floor above and below me, and it was like, y'all, like,
Okay. All right. Well, then how hilarious is it where you ended up all the way on the other side?
oh yeah, yeah, I'm probably not going to go to any reunions, but if I did, I think it would be a real delight.
If you do, I'm going with you.
100%, yeah.
We're gonna take your whole mixed anti-nuclear family and all go together. That's what we should do.
Correct, be like, these are my partners, and they'll be like, what?
Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, good stuff. Okay, all right. Well, let's get into some of the content of it. So,
Yeah.
what I would love to do is to make some space for you to be able to share, and then I'll just ask some questions as we move along. But that is, you know, when you came out of Christianity, you sound like you were pretty steeped in it, and you weren't necessarily like hating on it. Maybe there were some questions you had, but what and when and how did you start to wake up? Like, when did you start to have those gnawing feelings that maybe this wasn't the right fit for you anymore? Can you tell us a little bit about that journey and that process for you?
Yeah, I think I have enough distance from it now to like see some things even a year ago I wouldn't have seen. So the tradition that I grew up in, so we were United Methodist. When we moved, there was like messiness in my nuclear family with a divorce and moving and things. And so we wound up at an ELCA, an Evangelical Lutheran Church in America church, which is, they're like, I mean, it's like the difference between Diet Coke and Diet Pepsi, right? Like, they're
Okay.
both diet soda. Some people are really passionate about the difference, but like they're
Okay.
pretty close. Um, oh man, somebody's gonna come for me on that, but that's fine. I stand by it. So we wound up at a Lutheran church. I was confirmed Lutheran. The
Okay.
college that I went to was Lutheran. Um, and uh, I was on track to be a Lutheran pastor. So I transferred colleges in the middle of my what would have been my junior year because of illness, and that's a different story. Um, to a state school, to a public school, which turned out to be a great experience. I met my partner there, but he was an evangelical Christian, and so in for a myriad of reasons, none of which were ill-intentioned, I kind of like let go of my hold on the like main line. I was like, but I'm Lutheran. But it was more important to me to be with him. And so I started going to an evangelical church.
Okay. All right.
And I honestly think that that was the start. So that was
Okay.
probably 2009.
Okay.
And so some things about, now listen, you've heard me like paint myself as the desk witch, right? Like structures and rules and like
Yeah.
filing systems really get me excited. I'm like, oh, you need me to make you a schedule? Like, yes. Um,
You're so good at it.
spreadsheets, man, spreadsheets. Thank you. I appreciate that. I work very hard. So it was the very first set of questions that I had were really about the structures of the evangelical church, because the church we went to had a lead pastor,
Okay.
a like guidance team. I don't even remember, I was in college, so I don't even remember what they call it. He didn't call it an elder team, he called it something else, but like they didn't go to the church. They were like outside people who like provided spiritual oversight or something like that.
Okay.
That was it. And I was like, excuse me? The United Methodist Church has like
Yeah.
several layers of like
Hierarchy.
yes, hierarchy. And I understand now, from having been in evangelicalism for the vast majority of my adult life, that that feels like control to evangelicals. But to me, it felt like safety. It felt like, well, you can't get too far off the rails before somebody intervenes. There's backups. Now, part of the reason, I'm going to go on a teeny tiny rabbit trail. I know that part of the reason I felt that way was that my grandfather, who I loved very much and was very close to, he passed in 2010.
Okay.
Um, his specific job in the United Methodist Church was as a crisis interim pastor. He
Ooh, what
went
is
into
that?
churches where something traumatic happened.
Oh,
A
okay.
pastor died suddenly, or had an affair, or
Okay.
embezzled money, or committed some other crime and was defrocked.
Okay.
And
Defrocked.
so they would move on a dime. They would get a call and 2 weeks later have to be moved across the district.
Wow. Okay.
And his whole job was to love that congregation and take care of them as they went through the call process, the healing process and the call process for a new permanent pastor.
Whoa. Okay.
So to me, it was like, yeah, shit's gonna hit the fan. And when it does, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? You got no bishop, you got no regional overseer, you've got no district supervisor, you have nobody. So what if, and like it doesn't even have to, again, it doesn't even have to be somebody does something wrong. It could just be like your pastor gets hit by a bus.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Man, there's so many things. There's so many things that are popping up that I'm like, okay, your chart's making more sense even more.
I'm starting to make a lot of sense. Yes. So I get into evangelicalism. I'm at this very small, very conservative. Also, so the ELCA was one of the first mainline churches to ordain queer people.
Okay.
I think the first church in the world to ordain trans people.
Okay.
Very progressive. And I could get to this
Yeah. Very like Bible church.
conservative church.
Yeah.
So whiplash,
Yeah.
whiplash. Yes. I'm on the worship team because I'm a vocalist.
Okay.
Um, I so the very first thing that happened to me, and I would call this spiritual abuse. I would call this spiritual abuse.
Okay.
I had been baptized as an infant because that's what happens in mainline denominations. And I was told that I would no longer be allowed to even sing on the worship team unless I was rebaptized as an adult, because infant baptism doesn't count. It's not biblical. And
Ooh.
no amount of evidence that I could bring, like I brought biblical evidence. And I was like, what do you mean? Paul baptized whole families. You think whole families didn't include babies? Like what? Um, didn't matter. The pastor was a hard line on it. And I caved. So I got
Okay.
rebaptized.
Okay.
Now, if you know anything about the Lutheran Church, baptism is foundational. Like,
Okay.
so for me, in that period in my life, when whatever crisis of faith I had, whatever was happening, someone dying, terrible things happening in the world, like I am baptized. I have been marked, I've been called by God and marked by the cross of Christ forever. Like that was it, right? I had assurance, you know.
Oh, the amount of like what I'm hearing around the church and its sense of control and safety is a whole tangent in
Mhm.
itself that I really want to go
I
down,
know.
but I'm gonna hold steady.
Yep.
Okay.
We'll do it, like we'll do a whole other episode on that. So So this church is where I'm at until my husband, my now partner, um, we were dating at the time. He gets a job in another state. Like we just graduated from college. He gets a job in another state and we move. We leave that church. That church closed its doors 2 weeks after I moved,
Oh,
very
wow.
suddenly, with no warning and with no input from the congregation. Like the pastor said, I have been called to do something else. Next week will be our last service. That's the end.
Wow.
And that felt very traumatic. So even though we had
Yes.
moved, the church we had been in together closed.
Okay.
Trauma, evangelical trauma number two. So we find a church in our new town that my partner had. We were not married at the time. He was very sure. I sent him to one church that turned out to be like not it. It's very funny. It was part of a movement that was like very conservative, but secretly conservative. They like
Okay.
looked very liberal. And then he was like, oh yeah, we can't go to that church. So he finds this church immediately. And we wind up at this church. And that's with some weird interplay with a mainline church that we went to because of scheduling problems. We
Okay.
were at that church from 2011 until 2020, the end of 2022.
Okay.
Is that right? Is it 2024? Yes, that's correct.
Yes, 2022. Yeah.
The end of 2022. So we got married by the pastor of that church.
Yeah.
Both of my children were baptized as babies in that church.
Okay.
Um, I was on the lead. We were both on the leadership team at various times.
Okay.
I was on the leadership team until the day I left.
Okay. Yeah. So let me ask you a couple of questions here before we get into this portion of the story, which I know is really important.
Mhm.
But that is, as you had been growing through different forms of your faith and different ways of like seeing your world, what at that time when you first crossed that line in 2011, like what did you feel was like your spiritual purpose at that time? Like did you feel like you had a calling on your life to still be a Lutheran pastor? Like did you still feel like you had a call to be in leadership? Like what was driving you from a purpose level at that time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I knew that I don't think at that time I had given up on the dream of being a pastor in some
Okay.
capacity. I
Okay.
also knew that in evangelicalism, that looks a lot different. So in like the Lutheran Church, for example, the ELCA, you go get a master's degree, you need an MDiv for that, and there's a call committee and there's a student pastorate, and that like there's a very set path, and there's some deviation depending on what kind of ministry do you want to do. Do you want to do parish ministry or prison ministry? Like there's some specialty, but like you need to go to seminary
Okay.
and you pretty much do that full time. Like pretty much do that full time. That's not something that you typically do like part time as like a part time student.
Okay.
You absolutely can. That's not like the typical way though. And in the evangelical church, there's like no like, and the movement that we were a part of, the denomination we were a part of that didn't like to call itself a denomination. Um, there was no seminary. Like you
Okay.
could go get a master's of divinity from like a divinity school or another seminary, but like that, like number one, that wasn't required for
Okay.
ordination in that tradition.
Okay.
And number two, there was no standard. So it was like you could go, I mean, anywhere with like wildly different theologies, right? So somebody who goes to Duke, which is has a Methodist, you know, history, is exactly the same as somebody who goes to like Fuller Theological Seminary, which is much more conservative and is non-affirming.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, which for folks who are not from Christianity means that they do not recognize the validity of queer folks.
Yeah.
Like non-affirming theology thinks that queer folks are invalid in some way, either that like
Yeah.
they should celibate, they shouldn't be married, which was not my vibe. I have been fully queer affirming every day of my life.
Okay. All right. So let's take that information and bring it into the next organization that you had been a part of for 11 years. So were they open and affirming on the outside and not on the inside? Like what tell us a little bit about that. Like where did you find your purpose in that? Because I don't feel like you answered my question, which is like what was
Yeah.
driving you, right? Like was
Well,
there a sense of personal purpose, or was it a sense of like this is my responsibility to be a part of this? Like did you ever like lose your sense of purpose in it? Like tell me more.
I think that evangelicalism as a, excuse me, movement
Mm-hmm.
started to kill my love for the church.
Oh wow, say more on that.
And think I think that happened for a couple of reasons. And again, like I have some distance on it, and perhaps I will think something different later. I don't know. And I'm not putting any like blame anywhere. This is not a blaming statement. This is more like as I so the community that we were in said that it was welcoming to everyone. And the movement, the denomination, actually went to great lengths to hide its non-affirming theology, but it did not ordain queer folks.
Okay.
And it left it up to the local congregation to decide whether to let queer folks be in. I'm using queer as like a shortcut for LGBTQIA plus because it's a little more succinct and I feel like I could speak a little bit better. Um, Left it up to the local congregation to decide where queer folks were permitted. That was a red flag for me, permitted to serve. So I don't want to go into too much detail because it's not my story to tell, but right after my oldest was born in 2014, and I was like, I mean, if you're a parent, you know, like the newborn stage is like the thick of it, right? You're like not sleeping and we had some feeding issues around like intolerances. So I was doing an elimination diet, which felt completely consuming to me at the time. So at that time, peripherally, I was aware that at our church we had a very big shakeup about a queer family who
Okay.
was not permitted to serve in our children's ministry. And today in 2024, I should have left then.
Mm.
I should have said, absolutely not. I understand that it's the position, like non-ordination is the position of the denomination. Honestly, I should have left when I found out it was a non-affirming denomination.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
when that happened in my local congregation and a family was hurt, some people that I knew and cared deeply for, I should have said, I cannot be part of this.
Mm.
And it didn't for a lot of reasons. And I don't want to make excuses because there's not a good excuse. I participated in a system that hurt people.
Yeah.
I
We
just
both did.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was like that's like a flag post in the like my memory of like
Yeah.
that was a problem.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, but so as those things, that was a big thing, but as those small things kept stacking up, I remember thinking like I stopped being proud of inviting people to my community, into my community. I stopped, and like the word is evangelical. They want you to evangelize.
Yes.
And it was around this time that I started to realize like I'm not sure that I think people need to be evangelized.
Ooh, yeah. Okay.
Like my faith is right for me and
Yeah.
it's right for the people in this community, and I'm happy to like talk about it and share about it with people who are curious or
Yeah.
interested, but I'm not sure that like I need to tell everybody and convince everybody. Now our community was very good about being like we're not stealing We're not stealing sheep, right? We're not like stealing people from other congregations. We don't think we have it necessarily more right than other people. But like unchurched people.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know, man, maybe they're fine. Like maybe they don't want to go to church. But in the South, that was very not a thing. So like
That
in
was,
the Midwest where I grew up, some people just didn't go to church, and that was just like not a big deal.
okay.
It's a very big deal in the South.
So
So
what
that
year was that though? What year
so that
was
was like 2014, 2015.
that? Okay. All right.
I started to be like, I don't know, man, I can't, but I knew that because the values of the community did not line up with my values, I no longer felt good in like openly inviting people anymore. So that was like point one, where now that doesn't mean I didn't invite people. There were people who were curious and who were like, I'm looking for a church. Tell me about your church. And then yeah, like I would obviously tell them. But as far as being like, my community's great, my community is super uplifting.
Do you know
No.
what's really interesting about that time for you specifically?
Oh, tell me.
That was your Saturn return.
Yeah, it was.
That was your Saturn return in the ninth house, which is
Mhm.
spirituality. So a
Yeah.
crisis of faith makes sense.
So then there was another crisis in the church that, again, not my story to tell and would be a whole episode series on its own. But it was an act like it was the second time we should have left. There was an abuse that happened in the congregation that was handled in a way that did not center the victim and
Okay.
instead insulated the community and its leadership from liability.
Yep.
And at the time, I knew, like, I was greatly uncomfortable, and
Yeah.
I was so afraid. I can feel the feeling in my body of
Okay.
like, well, I can't lose these people. They're my whole life. So I
Yeah.
just kind of have to go along with it.
Yeah.
So that was thing two, the second point where I can be like, oh, I absolutely should not have gone along with that. I should have fought harder. And if they wouldn't change their way, I should have left.
Okay.
So that was it also in like 2015. So what
Okay.
else happened in 2015 was the election
Yeah.
cycle
Yeah.
where,
That was a big point of the deconstruction movement.
yes, Donald Trump ran against Hillary Clinton.
Yep.
Now listen, I don't want to get into like um and I could, because I'm a like political science minor. Like we could get into the minutia of the election, but that's not the point. The point for me was that I saw a whole bunch of people who I loved and had previously respected throwing out
Yeah.
their moral compass for party loyalty. They were being extremely misogynistic. I looked at men who I had trusted
Yeah.
with my body and my daughter's body vote for a man who said it's fine if you grab them by the pussy. Just grab them by the pussy. They like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-mm,
Yeah. That
mm-mm.
was big. That was a big wake up call for the deconstruction movement in general.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's fast forward a little bit so we can get to the part of your reclamation.
Yeah.
So what made you leave?
Yeah. I think I really woke up when I had my second daughter. And that's when I found you. I had been, well, I found Kevin Garcia
Yes, love them.
through the liturgists
Yep.
community, which is like, I think a really common
Yeah.
place
Right.
that like a lot of people deconstructed in, which was a beautiful safe space. Like I will never not be grateful to Mike McCart, Michael Gunger,
Yep.
Hillary
Same.
McCart. Like I will never not be so grateful to them for that space. And so I had been so curious about tarot, and I just remember finally getting all my courage up and booking a reading with Kevin.
Yep.
And they were so wonderful,
They are.
which
Yep.
is like so funny to me because they're a little sharp on the internet, right? They're just a little, but I had met them at the liturgist gathering, so I knew they weren't like that in real life. Not like that. I mean, I knew that they would
Yeah.
be kind and gentle with me. So, and they were so kind and gentle. And they said, do you follow the church witch? You were still operating very much in like the church witch space. And I was like, I do. I follow her on Instagram. And they were like, he at that time. They
Yeah.
were like, so I apologize, Kevin. They were like, you should really work with her. I think that you would really jive with her. So I booked a Golden Shadow reading.
Thank you, Kevin.
I know, Kevin. I should send Kevin a present. They won't remember me. I'm sure I was one of like 10 readings they had that week, but like Kevin changed my whole life with that.
Oh,
And I don't know if you remember this, but our reading got rebooked like 3 times because I got sick and then you got sick and then something happened, or maybe just 2 times. But I was like, come on, I'm just trying to meet this woman. Like, I'm just trying to figure out if she's like my teacher. And then like, it's all history from there. But that was Eliza was a baby. My youngest daughter was a baby. She was a baby. And so I did your ancestral program first and then the apprenticeship. And again, like it's all, we can do that some other time. But so I was doing that work, right? This like really emerging, and I like really resisted the witch label for a long time. I was like, I'm a mystic, I'm a seeker, I'm a so I'm doing that work. And at the same time, I am on staff at an evangelical church through a leadership change, through selling a building, through looking for a new building, a real identity crisis in this community. I don't think they would label it an identity crisis, but I would. And really just trying, just like white knuckling it.
Yep.
And no, like you and my coven mates, like everybody kept telling me, like, it doesn't fit anymore, babe. It doesn't fit. So it was not until there was a conflict. I had an interpersonal conflict with a person in my community that I think was handled extremely poorly.
Extremely poorly.
That I left because I felt like I had to. I felt like I felt forced out. I felt I think I was abandoned, honestly,
Definitely.
because it was easier. It was easier for I was the less squeaky wheel.
Yeah.
And I don't think they thought I'd ever leave.
Yeah.
And then when I did, the like there's never been repair between
Yep.
myself and the congregation or my at this point. I guess I hope for closure still, which is probably like not a super healthy thing. Because we could, and I tell this to people all the time, like, you don't need someone else for closure, you can bring closure yourself. But I think the cost to repair and the cost to do the work of like repairing between me and the person I had the conflict with, me and the leadership who abandoned me, would have been too great. They were unwilling to pay that cost. It was just easier. There's a Hosier song called Eat Your Young.
Yes.
It's quicker and easier to eat your young, and that feels very.
Yeah.
It was
Okay.
quicker and easier to let me walk out the door.
Yeah.
And so in doing that, I realized how exploitative,
Yes.
particularly the evangelical church,
Yes.
is to its people,
Yes.
particularly the female identified people.
Yes. Yes. Free labor. Yes. So many things. Okay. So we're at the point where you got your courage and you got your wits about you and you left while simultaneously studying the esoteric arts, going through multiple initiations, being a part of a coven. So this is the part where, in the school, we talk a lot about that paradox between pastor and priestess and savior and sovereign. Where do you feel like you found yourself at that point? Like, let's stay in the past for one more moment and then we're going to
Yeah.
moving forward to where we are
No,
today.
absolutely.
Where did you feel like you were?
I think the last year of being in that community, I truly had hit a point of like leaving the pastor archetype and moving into the priestess archetype. And I mean, you saw, I was desperately trying to bring sovereignty into church.
And how well did that go?
It went horribly. It was genuinely terrible. I was accused of treating people like children for asking for their consent and using a talking stick. Oh, kicked my phone stand. I was like it was like the idea that everyone would have to take responsibility for themselves and their own
Yes.
feelings was so upsetting to
Yes.
some people. Some people took it extremely well. Like there were individuals who I was like, ah, okay, I see the light bulb like
Yes.
coming on. But here's the thing, evangelical theology in particular, and I'm making this distinction because I do think evangelical theology is distinct from mainline theology. I have
Yeah.
other problems with mainline theology.
Let's be specific.
But like I want to be, I mean, it's the bachelor's in philosophy of me that needs to be like extremely specific with what I'm talking about. But the evangelical God, and I'm using a small g for
Yes.
God, is does not respect anyone's sovereignty. There is no um agency for
Mm-hmm.
that God. You hear it in the like I have a really hard time listening to worship music,
Yeah.
not just because it's triggering, that too, but also because I hear this like the stalker vibes. That God doesn't like if I say no to that God is going to chase me down and never stop.
Yeah.
Okay, if a person did that, I would call the police.
Yes, it's an abusive God. Truly.
Yes.
Yes.
Also like doesn't like a God that allegedly created me with a fairly sharp intellect, but then asks me to throw it out the window.
Yes.
Faith is one thing, but asking me to like actually like turn my brain off and throw it out the window is another. Uh,
Yes.
Asking me to vote allegedly for someone who not just has no respect for women, but like actively hates women.
Yes.
No, no,
Yes. Okay.
absolutely not.
So
So
you found yourself in like a lot of conflict.
yes, a
Okay.
lot of conflict, and so I had on the inside changed and was desperately resisting with just every ounce of my being, changing my outside reality to reflect that inner change. Now, there was a whole bunch of factors to that. One is the like social aspect. That was my whole community. That was our whole community. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's why they do it that way.
Yeah.
Number two, my partner I will continues to identify as a Christian. And I felt like asking them to either continue on in church without me or to leave church with me. I felt like that might be a threat to my marriage. That
Yeah.
felt really scary.
Yep.
My children, their best friends were in that community. I felt like in order to make myself comfortable, I was putting my children at a disadvantage, which felt really selfish. So it felt really complicated at the time. And I'm not saying it wasn't, but I am saying with some retrospect, like with some time on it, it wasn't that deep.
Yeah. Okay. So once you guys did decide to leave, and you, just for all listeners, remember that Amanda was in very intense programs with initiations involved. An initiation means that you willingly go into a descent and let some part of you die. And on the other side of the ascension process, you cross a threshold into a different identity. So at this point, for listeners, she had already gone through at least two and was sitting as one of my highest apprentices, which is that's a challenge. I personally pull a lot of things out of people, but she was consistently doing it and doing it afraid often, which was really, really cool to watch and witness. Um, so when you decided to leave, what did you like now that you look back, right? I'm sure at the time, as a matter of fact, I know at the time there was a lot of grief, there was a lot of confusion, there was a lot of hurt. But at this point, 2 years later, looking back and we think about purpose, we think about spiritual gifts, we think about direction. Like, what do you think you learned there that you're able to use here on this side, fully leaning into the priestess aspect of your spiritual leadership versus that pastoral, like victim scapegoat kind of consciousness, to be in that sovereignty and that priestess energy? When you look back, like, what did you learn from these painful experiences that you can utilize today to be in deep service and support to people? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I think number one, sovereignty means more to me having had my agency removed
Yeah.
than it would have or attempted to be removed. I never really gave it up. Like I never really let it go. But being in a place where, I mean, I guess I did. That's okay. We'll unpack that later. But having given up my agency, having given up my sovereignty, and then to take it back and take it back forcefully and honestly,
Yes.
violently, it was violent. It was violent for me. It was violent for my family, and it was violent for the people who I walked away from. Again, I don't think they would see it that way. I think they think I threw a temper tantrum. I mean, I don't know because there's been no closure, but I
Yeah.
think they think I threw a temper tantrum and blamed it on something else because I just wanted to leave.
Yes.
And that could not be farther from the truth because I so desperately did not want to leave. I thought that I would grow old with those people. I thought that those people would be at my children's weddings.
Yeah.
Like that's
Yes.
who I thought those people were.
It was a divorce.
It was a divorce. It was honestly one of the most painful things that's ever happened to me, including like the death of my beloved grandparents. Like I put rank it up there with that. So the first thing is like sovereignty, I do not think would mean as much to me if I had not given up so much of my agency in that environment.
Yep.
The second thing is understanding healthy community. So like so this whole conflict happened because of a perceived slight or maybe a series of perceived slights. I'm still not even clear on the whole sequence of events because again, there's been no closure.
And no
But
lack of accountability, just an
yes,
absolute lack of accountability from leadership.
yes. So recently, I in a leadership position had someone in my care and I had a conflict, a small conflict with them. And we have repaired it and have moved past it because um both of us took accountability. Both of us were more interested in like caring for one another and maintaining our own sovereignty and not placing blame or taking responsibility for things that were not ours or did not belong to the other person. So
Yeah.
like understanding that the dynamic of healthy community and fostering a place as a facilitator for that to get worked out because it's messy, right? Like there is conflict happens. Avoiding conflict is not the answer. Repairing conflict is the answer to conflict. So
Yes.
fostering like it ruined my life that I had leaders that did not know how to repair conflict. I will
Yes.
never be a leader that is more afraid of conflict than I am willing to wade into the messy waters of repairing conflict. Never. I'll do it crying, I'll do it shaking, but I'll never avoid it because it ruined. I mean, it didn't ruin my life, but I thought that it was. I thought it was ruining my life
Yeah.
because my leaders were too weak to heal conflict.
Yes.
I will always work on my conflict resolution skills. So that's thing number two is like how important repair is in individual relationships, in communities,
And in
um,
leadership.
and in leadership. Yeah. Like as a leader being strong enough to take on the mantle and say like, hey, wait a minute. I see like this conflict is happening. I understand, especially with like some of the people that we work with are very new into understanding their sovereignty. It's
Totally.
messy. It gets very messy. And it should get messy and it should get messy in safety with leaders who will walk along with that lantern on the path to show you the next step.
Absolutely.
Drop
Yeah.
that key to that gate and show you how to open it. Like that's what we have to do. So that's really important to me, is like healthy like healing after rupture, because ruptures happen. Um I mean, I had thought of a third thing, but it has escaped me now.
Okay. Well, I would say that like one of the things that I have learned are very necessary to be able to work with people like that is that you have to have a pretty flexible ego, which means you have to be able to be introspective and you have to be willing to not just defend your ego, but to basically look within and recognize what part you played in it. And as shocking as that may sound, as such a simple concept, it is very rare. It is very, very rare. And
Yeah.
so what I would ask is, do you feel like you can just work with anyone anymore?
No, I don't think I can work with just anyone. Um, I continue to have a very hard time working with men.
Yeah.
I just do. Now that's not like I have a couple of men floating around, male identified folks. It doesn't, this is not like, we're not being turfy, but like, who are doing the work. So I'm starting to suspect that it is actually less gender based for me
Yeah.
than it is like meeting people who are doing the work.
Yes.
And that as a population, male identified people are less likely to be doing the work than female identified people.
Yeah.
Um, but also, like, my work now is based very much around cycles,
Yeah.
and men don't have the same cycles as women. So, like,
Yeah.
I don't, there's nothing I can do about that. Now, if a man wants to learn about cycles, like, my partner knows more about the average man than cycles, because
Well, there's a lot of women in that house.
there's a lot of women in this house. Yeah. And so, like, if men want to learn about it, I don't know that I'm going to turn them away, but I don't think I'm going to bring them into the inner circle.
Yeah.
Um, I know that so I think part of what happened in the conflict was that everyone's ego was activated, everyone, mine included, bubbled up to the surface, and we all got defensive,
Yeah.
everyone in the situation. And then, because of the work that this all feels super prideful, but like, because of the work that I've been doing, I realized, like, I need to pull my ego back. I need to, like, let my core self come up to the surface to observe the situation and understand the part I might have played in it.
Yeah.
And no one else in the situation was willing to do that. And
Yeah.
you can't carry to this day. I have still said, like, the last thing I said was, I would really like to have a mediated conversation with the person and the other person in the conflict, to try to understand what's happening, because the two of us cannot communicate one on one. That's very obvious, but I still don't understand what happened, and I need help understanding that before anything can move on. That's still where I left it,
Yeah.
and
Well,
no one was willing to do that. And so that was when I was like, then I'm out. I can't. And for me, I think this is really important for people to hear, because I think a lot of us are like, why didn't I stand up for myself sooner? Guys, I wouldn't have done it if it wasn't for my kids watching.
yeah. Yeah. And I would like to kind of put this portion, in a bit of a package around, as a leader that worked in the church before as well and identifies as a priestess and not a pastor any longer. I would say that the real problem is on an establishment level, and that is
Understood.
leadership that is unwilling and untrained to take leadership, to actually take leadership over a situation, because in the root, especially of evangelical Christianity, is there is always a scapegoat. There's always the devil. There's always somebody else to blame. So you don't have to take personal responsibility. And then just the inability to take personal responsibility because of how much it's going to affect the entire business. And I said that right. Church is a business. So
Yep.
I think that when you look back on it, my question to you is, was it worth it? What do you feel like you have now besides the courage, the decision, and the ability to, as a leader, know how to take responsibility and lead? When we think about your spiritual gifts, though, like, do you feel like they are the same? They're just being utilized in a different way? Because I tend to see a lot of people come through and they were maybe, they're prayer warriors, or they were singers on the worship ministry, or they had the ability of prophecy or prayer. And when people leave Christianity, they kind of throw it all out, baby and bathwater. And they think that the church gets to claim those parts of them. And so, what I want to hear is if you feel like you were able to reclaim yourself, your spiritual gifts, and reorient them today. Do you feel like you can name what those are and how you've taken them into this next version of your leadership?
Yeah, I think I'm still doing that. I think I'm still very much in process of some of that. So, um, I think I've just always been a strong leader. I say strong leader, I don't mean that I've always been a good leader, but like I have always been felt like a leader. I was always the like kid in school who, when they were like, who's going to be the leader of the group project? I was like, I mean, I'll organize all you people. That's fine, right? Um, and I like, now that I have an understanding of like my life from an astrological perspective and some archetypal understanding, like I think that makes sense. I think for a long time I was made to feel kind of guilty about it, of like, you're being controlling. It's not being controlling. It's okay for me to be a good leader. Even now I get a little bit of discomfort saying that. So like,
Yep.
obviously I'm still in process, but like, I'm a good leader. I'm not a good leader of everything. Don't put me in charge of like a construction project. That'd be a terrible idea.
You're an
But like,
organizational leader for sure.
yes,
Very
I
much an
also
organizational leader.
yes, I also think something that a wound that was dealt to me in that context, in the community that I came out of, a wound that was dealt to me was that I am not a safe person and that I do not hold people's stories well. And I think I'm just now recovering from that, because I would tell you that like holding people's stories and stewarding people's stories
Yeah.
is actually one of the most important things in all of my world. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'll cut in right here and say the whole situation was fucked and it should have never happened in the first place. And it was just a man that couldn't handle a woman calling them on their shit. And that's what really happened. But I
yeah, it
digress
was a
from.
very disintegrated Enneagram 4 male. And
Yeah.
so like, but that was a wound that was dealt to me. And like holding people in safety, mothering people from a spiritual perspective, those things have always been important to me. And I feel like I'm finally like gaining my confidence back and being like, no, it's actually okay. Like our apprentices are safe with me. Like they're safe with me. They can bring me the things and I can hold the things with them.
Yep.
I have not, I was dealt a bit of a blow with my voice. So like I was a worship team leader. I'm a classically trained mezzo. Um, Out of like a classical voice studio. Like I like I haven't sang in years because a man who wonders why I don't like to work with men would not let me sing on the worship team. Um so that's something that I'm in the process of reclaiming. I think I'm figuring out I have been a good public speaker. I'm still reclaiming that a bit. I got some really harsh feedback about my preaching that I think was actually just like misogynistic, and they didn't like how liberal I was
Oh,
in nature. So but they couldn't openly be like, I just don't like hearing a lady up there. So they had to come up with something of substance to say. So like I'm still working on not being a nervous public speaker. But I have a history of being good at public speaking, especially when it's a topic that I'm like confident in my knowledge about, to like
yeah.
just get up in front of 400 people and be like, so this is how your brain doesn't prune neural synapses when you have ADHD. Like I used to be able to do that, and I don't feel like I can. Like my confidence took a hit.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, but I do, what I keep telling myself is like they don't have the last word. They don't get to have the last word over who I am or what I do. And so I just continue to um reclaim. I'm continuing to reclaim. The other
Yeah.
thing is it's not for public consumption, so I don't talk very much about like my current deity work, but the current deity that I'm working with is real hype man.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what
Been
I wanted to
helpful.
kind of like bring some closure around with this particular podcast today is what tools did you find that helped you, you know, get to where you are today? I know tarot was very important. I know astrology. Anything else? And then last notes for today would be any messages that you might have for listeners that might also find themselves in a situation where they want to be loyal and they're a part of a community that they don't want to lose, but recognize that you're not going to be able to change anyone's mind because it's a system level organization. Any like love letters, any words of advice or wisdom that you might want to share, and then we'll wrap it up for today.
Yeah, I think tarot was probably the most important tool, certainly at the beginning, and continues to be very much at the center of my practice today. um Astrology, understanding myself in relation to the cosmos has been just like life changing. Also understanding myself in relation to other people
Yeah.
has been really helpful. Understanding the rhythms and cycles not only of my own body as a bleeding person, but the rhythms and cycles of Gaia, of the earth,
Yep.
of nature, however you want to frame that up for yourself. um and then honestly, the scariest piece for me at the beginning was working with other deities, with other deity energy. I have come on a journey of my understanding of what is happening. I'm sure that in 10 years I'll think something different. But working with the energy of what other cultures have understood to be ruling the universe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the idea of the evangelical God and the Christian God is extremely specific,
Yep.
um, and kind of abusive,
Very.
particularly the evangelical God. I feel a little protective of the mainline God still because I did not feel abused. I felt a lot of expansion and expansiveness, and my questions and my concerns were all permitted in that
Yep.
space
Yeah.
and like encouraged. I was encouraged to like, oh yeah, there's some really interesting writing on that from the Desert Fathers and from like so all that said, like I don't know whether I some days I would say that I'm a Christian witch and some days I would not. Like I don't know. You have to ask me on any given day. But the evangelical God is extremely controlling, and I believe abusive. And the understanding of other cultures, the Greek culture, the Norse culture, their understanding of like a pantheon of gods who
Mhm.
also were like very imperfect. Like I'm not like Thor is not super
Yeah.
stable. He's kind of moody, like Zeus is a little bit of a problem. Like put it away, dude. So like I'm sorry. So we'll talk about that later. But understanding that there are bigger other ways to understand the world and the universe and the cosmos, super helpful. So here's what I would say. I'm actually just going to say what I would say to myself when I was on the precipice of leaving and and thought that it would be the worst thing in my entire life to happen to me. And I would want to say to her, there is another side.
Mm-hmm.
There is an ascent. And
Mm-hmm.
it is the darkest descent of your life. It is one of the darkest descents of your life, but there is an ascent. And so
Yeah.
what you need is you need someone holding a lantern. Find the people who are dropping the keys to the gates for you.
Yeah.
Um, there's someone that if you're getting dragged to the underworld, Hecate is watching and she will come rescue you. Like find the mythology that like resonates for you, whatever helps you understand that there is any light that's turned off can be turned on. And
Yeah,
so the longer you wait, the harder it gets.
absolutely. Very, very good. Well, let me bring a couple of closing remarks and we'll close out for today. But thank you so much for sharing your story. I feel very honored that I got to watch you and witness you in it. And I continue to still be impressed by your bravery and your commitment to your integrity about your word and the way that you deal with things. And so, I love you. You're my best
I
friend.
know. Thank you for
Um,
making the space for people to share. I think it's
yeah,
important to hear stories because, I mean, that's all a bunch of our work, right? It's like
yeah,
in stories, we
absolutely.
see ourselves.
Yeah. And I mean, I've for those of you that are listening that might be new, if you go back to the very beginning of my podcast, when it used to be called the Church Witch, it's gone under many identity changes. You'll hear my story there too. But what I would say is whether it's church, whether you're leaving church, whether you're leaving a marriage, whether you are just having a spontaneous awakening and all of a sudden the way that you live just doesn't make sense anymore. That's called a spiritual awakening. It's not a new concept. Kundalini yoga is thousands of years old and it describes the entire process. It's just that the earth is waking up and the astrological aspects that are happening right now are encouraging an evolution of human consciousness. And so that's what's happening on the larger level. But on the personal level, what you have to understand is this process is a death. It is a death of the way that you used to live and see the world and believe and experience and relationships. But what you need to know is that there is another side, like Amanda said. What you have to understand, though, is that side is not what it once was. And the sooner that you can put yourself in the place of radically accepting that this version of your life and yourself and this version of your avatar is coming into completion, and it's a whole journey that is very important part of your soul work, the sooner it becomes an incredible journey. It becomes something to live for until you get to the next stage where you recognize what is the next stage of your purpose. And it could be the same and it could be amplified. It could be very different. We never know. But what you're experiencing is the death of the way that you previously lived, while it also being a simultaneous rebirth. And it's okay. There are people like myself and like Athena, which she's Athena behind the school doors, that are holding the lamppost, that are holding the keys to the underworld and your ascent. And you're not alone. There are people that understand what you're experiencing and are there to help guide you and support you. And so in saying that, if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, but I find myself there and I don't know where I fit, I don't know what to do, please make sure that you check out the box that has the comments in it. You can check out all the things that we offer at the school. And that would be awesome if you have any interest in that. The other thing is just making sure that you are following Amanda on Instagram, and that is under the Desk Witch, and then the Wild Spirit School Instagram as well. So we thank you guys so much for coming today and just going down this rabbit hole with us. We're so excited to continue to make space for people's stories and wherever you are. And if you have an interest in sharing your story on the podcast, please do me a favor and email us at wildspiritco@gmail.com so we can see if it's the right fit. All right, guys, this is it for today, and we will see you next time. Have a great day. Bye.